Okay, guys, so today what we're going to do is we're going to continue our look at the number system, and we're going to be talking today about what are called integers. So you're going to see that what we're doing in this section is we're building the number line, and every time we add a new type of number to it, we'll talk about the operations and how that changes your world mathematically. Okay? So, because it's really important that you have a really good understanding of how numbers work when you move forward to the algebra section and then on from there in high school. Okay? So, last time we were here, we talked about what are called the natural numbers. Natural numbers start with what number? 1, and then they go up from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Okay? Now, if we add 0 to that set of numbers, we get what are called the whole numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And they go on infinitely to the right. Today what we're going to do is we're going to add the other half of the number line. Once you pass 0, there's a whole other set of numbers on the other side of 0 that are a mirror image of the numbers of the natural numbers. So, what does mirror image do? When you're looking at mirror, what does it do to the image? It reverses it, right? It reverses the image. So the image you're seeing is a reverse of what you think you're seeing. So, instead of 1, 2, 3 going that direction, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 going the opposite direction. Sorry, ignore that little minus. I didn't mean to. Almost can't write it without it. All right, so it's a mirror image of the whole number side. Okay? All right. Now, to indicate, however, that you're on the left of 0, what we do is we put those little minuses in front. And there's several ways of looking at this. And we need to look at the actual definition of what's happening here, and then we'll talk about the convention, the way we normally say it, and make it work. Okay? So anytime you see that minus, so a minus in front of a number means the opposite of. So if you see a minus in front of a 2, that means the opposite of 2. So a minus in front of a 4 would mean the opposite of 4. So what you have on this side is you have the natural numbers and their opposites. And that's the formal definition, the way you need to understand it that way, because it's going to be important when you start seeing some of the operations later if you think of it as the opposite. Now, the convention is just to use the word negative. So we would say a negative 2 or a negative 4. But keep in mind that minus literally means the opposite of. And again, it's going to make a difference when you start looking at the operations. It'll make it more understandable about why things are happening the way they are. Okay? So, what does a minus in front of a number mean? The opposite of. Okay? So if I have this number, we call that negative 1, but what does it really mean? The opposite of 1. Okay? And anytime you have numbers and their opposites and you start combining them, then you'll see why the rules behave the way they do, right? As long as you think of it as the opposite of. Okay. Now, as you notice that, remember that it doesn't matter where you are on the number line, the further you move to the right, the numbers get what? Bigger. And the further you move to the left, they get smaller. So if you look at negative 4 and negative 3, for example, negative 3 is to the right of negative 4. Therefore, negative 3 is the bigger of the two numbers, right? Which, again, is a mirror image of what's happening on the whole number side, or the natural number side, okay? So we often think of this as they're getting more negative. So when you get further and further to the left, they get more and more negative. So like a negative 10 is a very small number. Even though the number is 10, because it's got the minus in front of it, that means you're pretty far off to the left-hand side, right? And the further you go left, the smaller the numbers get. Yeah? Okay. So, probably not new information, but I always want to make sure I always begin at integers as if you've never seen anything, because most of the time what I see students have when they start working with integers is bad habits. So, I would rather you have no habits than bad habits. We spend more time cleaning up bad habits than teaching you new stuff. Did you know that? Okay? Because it's still true. All right, so that's what we're going to work on today. We're going to look at the operations, start the operations with integers. So in year 9, you're not going to be expected to just be able to use your calculator to do positives and negative numbers. You're going to be expected to do it by hand. So remember, this number section is all by hand, no calculators. So it's really important that you learn the rules. And it's really important that you learn them properly. Okay? So, I'm going to open up the book and let's look at some examples and walk through some processes. Okay, so the first thing you see in the introduction of integers in the book is that number line that we just talked about. The set of integers contains 0 and all the positive numbers and the negative numbers. And the negative numbers are actually what is the fat magic word? Opposites. Yes, good. We call them negative, but you have to remember that it really means the opposite of, and it'll make some sense later. One thing you need to see is that 0 is separated from the other numbers. 0 has no sign. It's the only number that has no sign at all. It's neither positive or negative because it represents nothing, right? So you can't have negative or positive nothing. It's just nothing. Notice that if you are talking about negative numbers to the left of 0, you must put that minus in front of them to indicate that they're on the left of 0, so that you're talking about the opposites. But on the right-hand side, if you don't have a sign, then you just assume that it's on the positive side or to the right of 0. However, you can still see these written with the pluses in front of them to indicate that they're positive. And for those of you for whom signs have been a problem, or signs you just haven't learned them yet very well, then you're going to want to put those pluses in as well as the minuses. It's never wrong, okay? And as a matter of fact, when we're working with integers in this section, I insist that you tell me if a number is positive or if it's negative. So the answer in this section is no longer 5. It's either a positive 5 or a negative 5. So if you don't say the sign, I'm going to sit there and continue to say, okay, right? Because you haven't given me the complete answer. It's either positive or negative, okay? So get used to writing the signs as we go. All right, so there's our number line. Let's talk a little bit about the properties. Now, they give you these rules for addition and subtraction. I hate these rules because it makes it look very difficult. It's not, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 rules for working with addition and subtraction. So let's just go back to our notebook paper. All right. And I'm actually going to give you a new term. We're going to look at how to combine integers. Remember that I told you that as we move forward in this class, we're going to be building our number system and we're going to be building on our sophistication with mathematics. So it's important that you learn some terminology. And one of those words that I need you to learn is the word combine. That's not a new word. You've heard combine before. Combine means to put things together, right? So, but when we say combine in algebra, combine always means either add or subtract. So instead of thinking of either adding or subtracting, now we're going to think of both of those operations as combining. We're either going to be combining, which means we're putting more in, or combining by taking some out, right? So it's important that you think of adding and subtracting as being combining. So again, you're going to see that many times it looks the same as in arithmetic, but as you move forward with integers in your algebra, you're going to see that combining makes a big difference if you start thinking of it as combined. There are 2 rules to be able to combine any integer. You must memorize them. If you can't quote them back to me without stopping and looking at your notes or asking somebody to get you started, then you don't know it. And if you don't know it, it's going to constantly be a problem, okay? Now think about it. If every day you had to have a list of things that you do just to get yourself ready for school, how much fun would that be? Okay, first, I wake up. Second thing I need to do is I need to go take my shower. Then I'm going to get dressed. Then it says I need to brush my teeth. How much fun would it be to live your life like that? Okay. Yeah. So the things that you do often, you don't want to even have to think about them. You just do them, right? You do them so much that, and you learn the rules so much that you know what it is you need to get done, right? As a matter of fact, think about like traveling somewhere, like walking to school or someplace that you walk a lot. After you've done it, sometimes you'll get there and you're like, I don't even remember how I got here, right? I know I got here, but I don't remember. I was thinking about other things. You don't have to sit and concentrate on how to do something. And that's how well you need to know some of the things in mathematics. And integers is one of them. So backwards and forwards. So we're going to help you out that way by coming in, and I'm going to ask you every day to give me the rules for integers. I'm just going to call on somebody and say, to combine integers, the first rule is this, right? Then I'm going to say, Jasmine, give me the second rule for combining integers, right? I'm going to put you on the spot, but you know it, so practice them. It's only 2 sentences, okay? All right, here are the rules. The first rule says, if the signs are the same, you can write that down, and then let's talk about what I mean. So in other words, I'm trying to combine 2 numbers that are either both positive or both what? Negative. Right? So that's what I mean by having the same sign. And it doesn't matter if you have 10 numbers to combine. We generally combine them in lumps of 2, right? We don't try to think of all 10 numbers at one time. So we just take them in pieces of 2, right? If the signs are the same, then what you're going to do is you're going to keep the sign. Now notice I put that first before we talked about the operation with the numbers. The signs, knowing the rules and using the rules properly are hugely disconnected. So you need to always think of the sign first. Once you have your sign out of the way, then you don't have to worry about the sign anymore. Yeah? So just always do the sign first. So we're going to keep the sign. So if they're both positive, then the answer is going to stay a positive. If they're both negative, then the answer is going to stay a negative. Okay? And we're going to add the numbers. So, determine the sign first, keep the sign, and then add the numbers. Okay? And we're going to do lots of examples of these. Okay? I didn't leave myself any room to do examples, but I know y'all are writing your notes properly. So let's look at an example. Say, for example, so we have examples on the side. We have -2 minus 5. Now this looks like subtraction because you have that minus between the 2 and the 5, yeah? But what really you have is we have a sign in front of the 2 and we have a sign for the 5. So we need to start thinking of this as combining. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the signs. There's a negative in front of the 2, so that means the 2 is what sign? Negative. There's a minus in front of the 5, so that means the 5 is what sign? Negative. So does that mean the signs are the same or different? The same. And if the signs are the same when I'm combining, what am I going to do with the sign? I'm going to keep the sign, right? So that means our answer is going to be negative as well. They're both negative. The answer is going to be negative as well. And then I'm going to do what with the numbers? Add them. So 5 and 2 obviously are 7. So my completed answer is -7. Couldn't be any easier, huh? So same thing when they're positives. There is no sign in front of the 2, so I assume it's what? Positive. And there's a plus in front of the 5, so that's a positive. So are the signs the same or different? The same. So if they're both positive, my answers are going to stay a positive. And then simply add the numbers. So +7. Now because it's a +7, do I need that plus in front? No, I don't have to write it. Is it wrong if I do? Absolutely not. And if you make sign errors, if you know that you have problems here, then get used to writing the pluses as well as the minuses. It'll make your life easier. Okay? So, super easy rule. If the signs are the same, what do you do with the sign? Keep the sign, and what do you do to the numbers? Add them. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. When you write the equation, do you write -2 minus -5, or do you write
No, this is just the way, just write the signs the way they are, because that's going to bring us to something else. Okay? Good question. So just write it the way they are. Okay? Now, you can have lots more signs in a problem. But again, just take them one at a time. So what if I have -2 plus 5 minus 3 plus 6? So there's a lot of signs there, yes? Now we used to think of those signs as add or subtract. But now because we are working with integers, we need to think of those minuses and pluses not as add and subtract, but as the sign of the number. Okay? So what kind of 2 is it? A -2. What kind of 5? Positive. What kind of 3? What kind of 6? Positive. Now, a couple of ways you can approach this when you have a bunch of numbers that you're combining. I can just take the first 2 and combine them, then combine that answer with the next one, combine that answer with the next one, whatever. But we know that if the signs are the same, we're going to keep the same sign and do what to the numbers? Add them. So if you have a long string of numbers like this, it's often easier if you just think of the ones that are the same sign. So the 2 is negative. What else is negative? The 3 is negative, right? So we can combine those two negatives and get an answer for the negatives. So the signs are the same, so I'm going to keep the sign, and 2 plus 3 makes 5. So those two combine to make a -5. Right? Now let's do the same thing, but with the positives. So the +5 and the +6. So the 5 is positive, the 6 is positive. So the signs are the same, so I'll keep the sign. So I'm going to have a positive. And what do I do to the numbers? Add them, so it's +11. Now that leads us to something else that we'll talk about in the next rule, because now the signs are not the same, are they? They're different. So we need our second rule. Okay? So if the signs are the same, we keep the sign and what? Add the numbers. Good. Okay? Now, let's go back and look at the second rule. The second rule. Well, if the first rule has to do with the signs being the same, what do you think the second rule is? There you go. If the signs are different. So this time we're talking about one of them is positive and the other is negative. Or the first one is negative and the second one's positive. It doesn't matter the order of them. It just matters that the signs are different. It doesn't matter if it's the first one or the second one. It has nothing to do with it. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat here, but I will explain to you why and how we're going to deal with this. So what we're going to do is we're still going to keep the sign of one of them. Okay? But the sign that we're going to keep is you're going to keep the sign of the larger number. So of the larger number. Now again, this is a bit of a cheat. Because if you have a 10 and a 5, a -10 is smaller than a +5, isn't it? So we're not talking about smaller on the number line. I just want you to look at the number value itself. So what's bigger, a 10 or a 5? A 10. So that's the one, it's the bigger one. It gets to tell the other one what to do, right? So we're going to keep the sign of the larger. Again, not number line larger, just look at the numbers and see which one's bigger. One of them is either going to be more positive or more negative than the other one. Bigger, okay? And then we will subtract the numbers. So you're simply going to keep the sign of the larger one and then subtract the numbers. Okay? Now, let's look at some examples of that. We'll just go back to that example that we were looking at here. We have the -5 plus 11. What's the sign of the 5? What's the sign of the 11? So that means I'm going to keep the sign of the larger, and that's the positive one, right? So my answer is going to be a positive. And what do I do to the numbers? Subtract them. And you always know the order of subtraction. You always take the bigger number minus the smaller one, okay? Because the sign is already there for you. So again, we said the 11 was bigger, so it's 11 minus 5, which is 6. Now again, do I need that plus in front? No, but it's not wrong if you write it, yeah? You know how you are. If you think you're going to drop signs, then write it. If you don't think you're going to drop signs, then don't bother, okay? I will never count it wrong if you write a plus in front, if it's supposed to be positive, right? If you write a plus in front, it's supposed to be negative, then you got problems. All right, let's look at another example. Say we have, let's see, negative 12 plus 3. I want to combine these. So before I combine them, I need to look at the signs. The sign of the 12 is what? Negative. The sign of the 3 is positive. So I'm going to keep the sign of the larger. What's bigger, 12 or 3? 12. And it's what sign? So that means my answer is going to be negative as well. Okay? And then I'm just going to take the numbers and subtract them. And it's always the bigger one minus the smaller one. So 12 minus 3 is 9. So my completed answer is negative 3. Now notice, if you thought of this as addition, this is a problem that looked like addition, but what did we end up doing? Subtracting. And that's why you can't think of those symbols as being add or subtract anymore. You need to think of them as the signs of the numbers. Because sometimes a plus means you'll add, sometimes a plus means you'll subtract. It depends on the combination of signs that you have, right? So be careful. Stop thinking of pluses as always meaning addition. Plus is now the sign of the number. It's a positive number. Yeah? Okay. Doesn't really matter. Say you had negative 9 plus 24. We're going to combine them. Are the signs the same or different? The signs are different, right? One's a positive and the other is a negative. If the signs are different, how do I determine which sign to keep? The larger one. And what's bigger, 9 or 24? There you go. And it's what sign? So therefore, your answer is going to be a positive. Good. Okay? And then what do I go back and I do what to the numbers? Subtract. So 24 minus 9 is?
15.
There you are. Pretty straightforward? Okay. Now, the problem is going to come when we start looking at the other operations. So it's really important that you understand that these are the operations for doing what? Combining. When we start doing multiplying and dividing, the rules are going to be different because they're different operations. So you've got to make sure that you combine, that you put the rule with the operation. So to combine integers, if the signs are the same, what do? Keep the sign and add. It's just right up here. I'm just reading along with me. If the signs are different, I'm going to what? Keep the sign of the larger and subtract. There you go. Okay? But again, you need to associate that with combining because those are the rules for combining. Pretty easy to do because you're talking about adding and subtracting numbers, right? That's what combining is, isn't it? Okay? All right, so let's go back to the book and see what they've got for us there. Okay, right away we end up with something odd. Okay, now, I want to look at this notation. So if you look at this one, they're putting in these pluses and minuses that they don't need because they're trying to make it obvious that you're combining them. Okay? So if it's 4 plus a negative 9, we would just write that as 4 minus 9. Plus a negative doesn't make any sense. Plus a negative means you're adding a negative or you're combining a negative. So just write it as a negative. Okay? So, look at this one. Negative 3 plus a negative 5. How should I write that? There you go. Negative 3 minus 5. There you are. Good. Negative 5. So, those pluses don't mean a thing. However, if you look at these will have an effect. Okay? And I want to talk about what it is and what you do, but I've already told you, if you'll just think about it carefully, listen to me carefully about what I'm going to say. This says 4 minus a negative 9, right? Well, remember that minus really has a meaning. What does it mean? The opposite, yes? So this means 4 minus. So 4 and the opposite of minus 9. So what is the opposite of minus 9? So what you're really saying here is 4 plus 9. And this is where my most hated rule comes from. People say that two negatives make a positive. That's not true. This is saying the opposite of subtract 9, which is what? Add 9. So 3 minus a negative 5. This is saying negative 3. The opposite of subtract 5 is what? Add 5. Plus 5. Okay? So if you see two negatives stacked together like that, think of it as the opposite of subtract, which is add. Okay? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're going to go to some exercises where you can practice some of these. So you need your snowflake. I'll project some of them in the beginning. Right?